Welcome to the Sermon in the Valley with Pastor Rob Eller. If you like what you hear, please subscribe to the podcast and share it with your friends and family. Thank you. Welcome back to the Sermon in the Valley, everybody. Pastor Rob here with your Monday episode. I hope all of you had a happy and wonderful Easter with your families. I know I did. It involved egg hunts and lots of rest because, quite frankly, after doing 5 services in 4 days over the course of the weekend, I needed a break, which is why, unlike what I said before about posting this sermon on Easter Sunday, I decided not to. I needed a break. My voice needed a break. So I'm doing this today because, well, like I said, I was exhausted yesterday. So here we go with my sermon and the gospel reading for Easter Sunday 2023. The Holy Gospel according to St. Matthew, the 28th chapter. Glory to you, O Lord. After the Sabbath, as the first day of the week was dawning, Mary Magdalene and the other Mary went to see the tomb. And suddenly there was a great earthquake, for an angel of the Lord, descending from heaven, came and rolled back the stone and sat on it. His appearance was like lightning, and his clothing white as snow. For fear of him the guards shook and became like dead men. But the angel said to the women, "Do not be afraid. I know that you are looking for Jesus who was crucified. He is not here, for he has been raised, as he said. Come, see the place where he lay. Then go quickly and tell his disciples he has been raised from the dead, and indeed he is going ahead of you to Galilee. There you will see him. This is my message for you." So they left the tomb quickly with fear and great joy and ran to tell his disciples. Suddenly, Jesus met them and said, "Greetings!" And they came to him, took hold of his feet and worshipped him. Then Jesus said to them, "Do not be afraid. Go, tell my brothers to go to Galilee. There they will see me." The Gospel of the Lord. Praise to you, O Christ. Christ is risen. He is risen indeed. We have made it through our journey in Lent. We have looked inward at ourselves, picked up our crosses, and walked with Jesus to Jerusalem. We were there during that triumphant but humble entrance into Jerusalem, when Jesus broke bread with his disciples and gave them commands to do likewise with others. Remember him and to love one another. We were there when he was betrayed into the hands of the authorities by one of his own, tried unjustly for speaking truth to power, mocked by the crowds, and forced to carry his own means of death through the streets, only being helped by a visitor from Africa, Simon of Cyrene, who was pulled from the crowd. We were there when Jesus was nailed to the cross, said his final words, and breathed his last. And we were there as we kept vigil at the tomb, waiting for today, for the promise of the resurrection. We have journeyed together these 40+ days just to get to this moment, the climax of Jesus' time on earth, what he'd been alluding to for so long. Along the way, we have learned from Jesus not to give in to life's temptations, that faith is for everyone. We are to be the light of the world. We aren't to judge and condemn others, and we are to live in the light as children of the light. We have become better disciples through this journey, and now we are witnesses to the most powerful miracle and lesson Jesus has for us. And it is through this conquering of death that we are saved and now have eternal life through Jesus. We see and try to understand this now, but nearly 2 millennia ago, that wasn't the case. Jesus' followers witnessed the crucifixion and thought that their rabbi and their Messiah was gone, and that they wouldn't be free after all. This had to be a gut punch because it was just a week prior that Jesus entered Jerusalem to what many had thought was the end of Roman rule and the reinstatement of Israel as a free nation. They were now in hiding, fearing for their lives, wondering if they were next. This didn't stop the women who followed Jesus because they wanted to ensure he had a proper burial. They weren't able to do anything right away after the crucifixion because it was the start of the Sabbath, and Pilate authorized the Pharisees' request that guards be placed in front of the tomb. On the day after the Sabbath, Mary Magdalene and another Mary went to the tomb. As they approached, there was a large earthquake. An angel appeared, rolled back the stone, and sat down. This sudden appearance almost literally scared the guards to death. Turning to the two Marys, the angel says a familiar phrase we've heard before. Do not be afraid. Do not be afraid. Generally, when you hear that phrase, it means something scary is happening or is about to happen to you. You are being assured that whatever it is, while you might feel scared, you are not alone, and you will not be harmed. It is meant to be a sign of comfort in an otherwise comfortless situation. That phrase is used twice in the Christmas story. First, when Gabriel visits Mary to announce to her that she'll give birth to the Messiah, and later to the shepherds to proclaim the birth of Jesus. That phrase has been used to ease people's minds and to be the prelude to some really, really great news. This time is no different. The angel tells the Marys that Jesus isn't there, not anymore, because he did exactly as he said he would. He was raised from the dead. The angel then tells us to go to the disciples, and along the way they will see Jesus. I have to imagine that the two Marys were incredibly confused, scared, and excited about what they were told. They believed what Jesus had told them about the resurrection. It was just a couple days prior that they witnessed him die. So how could it be true that Jesus was indeed alive? Put any of us in their shoes, and I imagine we would have healthy doses of skepticism. I like to think that they were talking while on the road. Could it really be true? I know he did some pretty remarkable miracles while he was alive, but this would be the one miracle to top them all. On the way to tell the disciples, Jesus suddenly appears out of nowhere and says, "Hello." Yes, the first people that Jesus appeared to after the resurrection were not the disciples, but the women who followed him and helped with the logistics of his ministry. Just as women were the first to hear about the good news of the coming of the birth of Jesus, the first to witness the good news of the resurrection were also women. Imagine the shock of seeing Jesus alive. Even though they fell to the ground and worshipped him, there had to be fear, because once again they were told that forward phrase they had already heard from the angel. Do not be afraid. After he tells the two Marys to go on ahead and tell the disciples what they have seen and that they're to meet Jesus in Galilee. Galilee is important because in Matthew, Jesus refers to as Galilee of the Gentiles, which is where the disciples received the Great Commission to continue the work of Jesus to the Gentiles. Fear is a basic emotion we have. Fear is part of survival. It's knowing the difference between what can harm us and what can help us, and having the basic instinct to run in the opposite direction of anything that hurts us. Seeing an angel of God, which by the way aren't the heavenly beings we have made them out to be, since they are first and foremost warriors of God, would and should scare anybody enough to need to change their pants. Hence why the Roman soldiers guarding the tomb fainted. This is why the first thing the angel says is, "Do not be afraid." They aren't there to harm anyone, but to act as a messenger. Similar reason for why Jesus said, "Do not be afraid." Because the first reaction you would have after seeing someone you loved die walking towards you would and should be fear. But Jesus assures them that there is nothing to fear. How can there be nothing to fear when Jesus didn't free Judea and Jerusalem from the clutches of Rome? That's because that wasn't Jesus' objective. He didn't come to free the literal land, but to free the people from the power of sin and death. There is nothing to fear because he fulfilled what he came to do. By dying, he conquered death once and for all. That is something to rejoice about, not fear. Fear is how we respond when we are confronted with a new truth that will forever change our lives. But at the same time, there is joy in that change. Have you ever noticed how fear and joy always seem to be together in our lives? On so many occasions in our lives, especially when some new reality comes about for us, we are basically a mixture of fear and joy. We get a new job, and we're excited about the possibilities, but fearful that we won't live up to them. We move to a new town, and we're excited about making new friends, but we're fearful that our old ones that we leave behind will soon forget about us. We become parents, and we're so overwhelmed with joy over this gift of new life. But at the same time, we're overwhelmed and fearful that we won't live up to the tasks and responsibilities that come with caring for this new life. In every instance, we have to find someone to make sure that our fears don't become so great that they take away from our joy. We can't be afraid of those major changes that happen in our lives. All of those examples I listed prior, all of them have been in my life in the last 6 years. I left the city that I called home for the first 28 years of my life to move to Ohio, to start a new adventure, and to follow my calling into ministry. I left behind friends that I made along the way. And truth be told, I have lost touch with some of them. But I've made many more friends along the way. I was full of fear as I took on the call here at Emmanuel Lutheran Church, because I was fresh out of seminary and I couldn't believe that I was actually doing this. And frankly, there are days I still can't believe it. But I love what I do, and I wouldn't trade it in for the world. And I've become a parent twice since moving to Ohio. And each time I felt unprepared and scared, but I knew that I could do it. I could be a parent. If the last 3 years have proved anything, it's that we need to be open to those life-altering changes that come at us, but at the same time, it's all right to be fearful of them, as long as we don't let that fear overwhelm us. If we do, we start to focus on the past, clinging onto it, hoping that it returns. Instead, we need to look to the future, to what God has in store for us. And when we're fearful, we remember the joy and fear that Mary Magdalene and the other Mary had on that first Easter morning, when they found the empty tomb, which changed the world forever. And the risen Christ on the road, and the words he said to them: "Do not be afraid." Christ is risen. He is risen indeed. And all of God's people said, Amen. Thank you for tuning in today. It was a real pleasure writing this sermon for Easter. Easter is one of my favorite holidays of the year. And it was a pleasure writing it because I was writing a sermon not truly on the resurrection story itself, but what came about with the resurrection story. And it was a fresh new perspective for me, and I'm hoping it's a fresh new perspective for all of you who are listening. As always, if you like what you hear, make sure you subscribe to the podcast, share it with your friends and family, spread the word to everyone you know. God's blessings on all of you, and have a good day.